Russia has dismissed the accusations of the team investigating the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 as, quote, absolutely baseless. Earlier on Wednesday, investigators charged 4 suspects with murder over their alleged involvement in the 2014 tragedy, which claimed 298 lives. Among the suspects are 3 Russians and a Ukrainian. The joint investigation team have also now requested cooperation from Russia after shunning Moscow's numerous offers to assist over the past 5 years. Well, let's now bring in Igor Zhdanov to the programme. Igor's been tracking this, not just today, I should add, for quite some time. But today is the point that the joint investigation team, Igor, actually named names. What's been said?
Well, exactly. It's not just names. It's been photographs. It's been some wiretapped phone calls. But I mean, the authenticity of those phone calls are, well, really subject of the verification is up to the court, is what I'm saying, to the official court of law. We've seen a lot of accusations, and the investigation has said that these 4 people were likely, very likely, not the ones who pushed the button that sent the missile flying up and, downing the MH17. But they have said that they maybe even gave direct orders, that they facilitated, that the investigation believes they facilitated the smuggling of the Buk missile launch system from Russia into Ukraine, and that eventually, basically, that their hands are marred with this heinous crime of downing this jet. As you've said, 3 Russians, 1 Ukrainian. Interestingly enough, none of them have connections to a Russian military base, to a Russian military brigade that is accused by the same investigation of smuggling the said Buk missile launch system that downed the jet. Still, these people, the investigators are saying that they will be putting their names on the international most wanted list, that they will be charging them with this crime, that they are set to take, that they want to take this case into the court of law. They said that the best way they believe is to do it is to stay in the Netherlands and to use the Dutch legal system and to try them in The Hague. Speaking of people who were mentioned, probably the most high profile of them at the time of the tragedy, he was the Minister of Defense of the breakaway Donetsk People's Republic. Now, of course, unrecognized, self-proclaimed. Also, at the same time, they're saying that they will not be asking Russia to extradite them to the Netherlands because they simply believe that because there's no agreement between Russia and the EU, an extradition agreement, what I mean to say. But they will be asking Russia's law enforcement, Russia's security service, to find these suspects themselves and bring them into questioning, to question them for the Dutch-led investigation.
In terms of the probe itself, Igor, it's not just Russia that's been quite critical, quite a significant player as well.
Well, indeed, because all of this happened, all these announcements happened with Russia absent on the board. Russia wasn't invited. Russia was kind of ostracized and kept away from the whole investigation. And I mean, Russia even had to bang on many doors to try and to get at least some information that it had to the investigation. But no, as you've mentioned, Russia is not the only one critical. For instance, even Malaysia, that is on board. Malaysia is a direct victim country of this.
Lost so many people in the tragedy.
Exactly, it was their airline. So even them, while officially they are on board, we did see a representative on Malaysia sitting behind that table and, delivering even some of his remarks. But previously, we've heard the most high-profile people in the Malaysian government criticizing the probe and calling it politicized. Have a listen.
They are accusing Russians of firing the missile. But what is the evidence? It could even be the Ukrainian government because they too have the same missile. We don't know why we are excluded from the examination, but from the very beginning we see too much politics in it. The idea was not to find out how this happened and all that, but they seem to be concentrated on trying to pin it on Russia. Here we have parties who have some political interest in the matter, and they examine.
So too much politics, the man is saying. Why is that? It could be because, again, Russia had a lot of information to provide to the joint investigative team, but they decided either not to use it or not to believe it. Now, I've created a short clip that explains that in detail, because it may seem a bit overwhelming. So here's just a recap of major points that Russia, of major facts that Russia tried to provide to the Dutch-led investigation.
The previous GIT investigation saw many triumphantly shouting accusations at Russia. But instead of trying to out-yell its critics, Russia showed original documents, raw data and experiment results which poked holes in the investigation. Exhibit A. Russia's defense ministry dug into its archives, and deep. It traced the missile based on the pieces discovered among the debris of MH17. The ministry determined its tail number, revealing the full life cycle of the projectile. Manufactured back in the days of the Soviet Union, in 1986 the missile was shipped to a military base in Ukraine. It never left the territory of the Soviet Republic, and then, after the breakup of USSR, of the country. According to the ministry's data, the Buk missile was moved only within the borders of Ukraine, and in 2014 it was set up and stored at a base in the west of the country. Exhibit B. The manufacturer of Buk missiles, Almaz-Antey, conducted a field experiment of its own. It targeted a segment of an aircraft hull similar to the downed Boeing with Buk missiles. The goal was to determine the likely angle from which the projectile impacted on the Malaysian aircraft back in 2014, and consequentially pinpoint the likely spot on the ground from which the shot was fired. The verdict: it could have only been launched from the Ukraine-controlled part of the front line. Exhibit C. Russia provided plenty of technical results to the Dutch-led investigation, from the specs of the Buk missile to radar readings from southern Russia, which borders with East Ukraine. According to Moscow, they can't be forged, and on that day radars failed to detect any launch, which would be impossible if indeed a Buk missile had been fired from a rebel-controlled area.
So as you laid out there, information findings were given from Russia to the GIT. What was done with that information?
Well, interestingly enough, we've all just seen what sort of information Russia has provided. But repeatedly during this media conference, the representatives of the joint investigation team, they were saying stuff like Russia did not cooperate at all, Russia did not explain anything, that Russia didn't provide any information, despite all this. But eventually, they were kind of forced into admitting that they did have a look at this information, but they chose to trust other facts over what Russia presented to them.
If you look back, you can establish that from the first day after the 17th of July, the Russian Federation hasn't disclosed anything about what happened, and that is a slap in the face to all the relatives of the victims. And I call on them to start cooperating to tell us what happened.
Yeah, we received that information from the Russian Federation, the information about the missile and the documents about the missile, and we also received the radar data, and that wasn't clear enough to say exactly what happened with the missile, and that didn't give us the right picture.
So they were so adamant at first, saying that they did not receive any information, but then only presented with a question over how they ruled out the version that the missile belonged to Ukraine. They kind of were forced to admit that they did look at it, but look at at Russia's radar readings probably, but they chose to believe the radar readings presented by Ukraine, also a biased side in this whole investigation.
Has there...
Yeah, you were saying?
Yeah, just on the actual reaction to this, the Russian...
I think we're looking at, we've just been looking at a quote by the Russian officials. Yeah.
On that, what's it been? Just sum up what that's actually been.
Yeah, sure, because we've just, within the past hour, we heard from the Russian Foreign Ministry, and basically they've called it a groundless accusations, and they said so because they've accused the Joint Investigative Team of using data that came from questionable sources. And they also, the Russian Foreign Ministry also pointed out that all the accusations coming from the Dutch-led investigators that Russia did not do enough to cooperate with the investigation, well, again, underlining that, well, look, there's this much information that we've given to you, and you still say that we're not cooperating enough. And I mean, even Vladimir Putin beforehand, he had said that if Russia is made part of the investigation, then Russia would be happy to recognize its conclusions, but all of that hasn't been done.